Ready, set, go. Here we go. All right, we're back. Horses in Fiction. I believe this is episode 4. And you're joining me, author J.A. Stein, as me and my horse. There she is. Val, walk in circles. Because she's rehabbing. And I've said that a million times, so maybe I'll just stop saying it after this time around. But bottom line is, filming these little excerpts of books and about horses is making this walk that I have with my lovely horse daily much more interesting, because we've been getting bored after 5 months of this. So we're going to keep doing it until we run out of books or something. Maybe she'll be better by then. Anyway, I'm back to picking on myself today. So I'm going to read you a little part from Knightess, which is my book, my very first novel. It starts out the Swords of Resilience trilogy, and I've got a couple scenes in here I'll eventually read, but I'll start with one, and it's towards the beginning of the book, and I think I'm just going to dive right into it today, and then we'll talk a lot more afterwards, because I've got plenty to pick on myself for. So bear with me as I once again do the whole walking, reading, holding camera thing, because I'm just crazy like that. Sorry. Okay, we're gonna get situated. Now we're ready. Okay, so this is like towards the beginning, I believe. Do you want to know what chapter it is? Let's say it's like chapter 2 or 3. It's chapter 2. Okay, so we're right in chapter 2. And so, don't want to give too much away, but basically, Eleanor has met Alec. Alec shows up in the stable yard while Eleanor is doing her maidly duties of laundry with her fellow maid / friend, Helen. And Alec says, "Hey, want to go for a horseback ride with me?" And Eleanor's like, "Well, no." But then Helen's like, "Yeah, you might as well go." So she has permission from her lady, which is Lady Gwen. So she goes. So where should we jump in? How about right here? Again, she looked to Helen, who again motioned for her to go. Ella was a fool, and she knew it. She nodded, and with a last apologetic glance towards Helen, set the clothes down, wiped her hands on her skirt, and accepted Alec's help up onto the horse. The chair-like saddle left her feeling somewhat precarious and dependent on Alec's lead. She wished to throw her leg over and ride astride like him, but the awkward seat made such a thing impossible. Alec mounted once he saw Ella was relatively stable. "Not for long, please, sir," she said quietly, then nudged her horse forward with her leg. The palfrey was an uncomplicated mount. Ella gradually relaxed and followed Alec out into the fields. At first, he led her horse, her reins always within reach of his grasp. He chatted amicably about the weather and the tournament, receiving mostly simple answers in response. When a pheasant shot out of the brush and spooked the horses, Alec instinctively reached for the palfrey to steady the maid, but already Ella was cantering off, laughing. She was as solid in a saddle as any man. Ella shot him a glance as they rode. Alec's silence both a relief and a worry. He was regarding her with furrowed brow, his sharp eyes taking in her every action. As their gaze met, he pushed his horse faster, and Eleanor allowed the palfrey to charge ahead, keeping pace. She smiled to herself, reveling in the glorious freedom a good canter offered. It was an hour later that the pair returned to the manor. Ella's cheeks were flushed with joy and exertion. It had been so long since she rode. Too long. Her hair was wind-tossed out of its neat braids. Alec was in much the same condition, though the furrow in his brow remained regardless of the fact that he was smiling at her. Ella gritted her teeth, reminding herself that most women couldn't keep pace with a knight on a destrier. But for the physical limitations of the now exhausted little palfrey, Ella would have. Obviously, Alec had noticed. Okay, so a couple things happening in this section. for one, she's side saddle. Now, I have to clarify the whole side saddle thing. So I've ridden side saddle, I've competed side saddle. I love side saddle. The side saddles of the medieval era are nothing like the modern side saddles or even the Victorian side saddles, which are your classic, very famous, like, hard to describe without an image, but they kind of have two horns, and then you can wrap your legs around the horns and you can hold on to those horns with your legs. The medieval side saddles, which they did exist, women also rode astride back then, but it wasn't as scandalous to be riding astride in the medieval era as it later became in the Victorian era. In the Victorian era, it was very scandalous for a woman to be astride. But, where was I going with this? Medieval side saddles were more like a chair. So if you picture a wooden chair with the legs sawn off, maybe a cushion on it, turned sideways on a horse, that is pretty much how they rode. So they were riding pretty much completely sideways on the horse. There was no forward facing, like in modern side saddles, we're still forward facing in our hips. Their hips were to the side of the horse, legs just dangling straight down. So a little bit of a misconception in a lot of fictional movies or that kind of thing, that it was more like the Victorian side saddles where they could sit forward and then their skirts were just billowing around them. The medieval women, if they were going to ride side saddle, were pretty much sideways. That is not a very secure seat. Back when I was researching this novel, because I had never actually ridden in a medieval side saddle, I tried to find an example of somebody out there that was actually riding in a medieval side saddle, and there was one YouTube video up, but I think it has since been removed because I had tried to find it again a couple years ago and I couldn't. But it was, the woman basically made her own medieval side saddle and got it to fit her horse, because fitting a side saddle to your horse is extremely important, because if the balance is off, I don't want to get too technical on you, but if the balance is off even a little bit, it can really hurt the horse's back, because you're obviously not as balanced as if you're just astride them. But she actually did walk, track, canter that horse. I think she cantered. Maybe she didn't quite canter. But anyway, she had ridden in this medieval side saddle, which is basically a chair, sideways on a horse. And had clarified, yeah, it's not very comfortable, it's not very secure, but it is possible. And they obviously did do it. And to make this a little more, in the Victorian era, it was very much a thing that if a woman was side saddle, she must have a male escort. It was in part to keep them secure on the saddle. And a little fun fact for you, number one leading cause of death in Victorian era after childbirth was riding side saddle. So it was a very dangerous thing to do, and that's, after it had come a long ways from the medieval chair on the horse. But there's a lot of accidents where women got tangled with their skirts, or their feet got caught in the stirrup, and all kinds of bad things. So in modern side saddle riding, we have safety adjustments for that. Again, I'm going to get too technical here, but we'll just leave it at that for now. It's still, you can do pretty much anything in a side saddle in the modern era, but point being, medieval era, there's a reason it was a chair. They didn't have the technology back then to make the women sit straight, and they had male escorts, which is basically what Alec is doing in this scene as he's riding next to her, keeping her reins in grasp, kind of being really easy on her. But I don't know if you caught it in this scene, Alec also has an ulterior motive in taking her for this ride in the first place, because he is already suspecting she is not who she says she is, which is not this docile little country maid who wouldn't know how to ride a horse at all, much less ride a horse side saddle that's cantering and actually stay on and laugh about it. But Eleanor, as you find out in the story, is no maid. She's pretty tough, and she's got a bit of a history, and this is basically the beginning of how Alec finds out who she is. It doesn't take him much longer after this scene to be like, hey, yo, I know who you are in real life, and you are not little Ella. You are actually Lady Eleanor de Lavan, and I know who your family is, and they are looking for you. So, what else can I say about the horses in this? Palfreys versus destriers, if you're curious. Palfreys were the sweet, docile, pretty much everyday riding horses, mostly used by women or I guess even children. Pretty much like your standard horse. While the destriers were the war horses that the knights had that mostly were used for tournaments or they would be used on the battlefield. There was different horses on the battlefield. Usually a knight had a string of them. It would have a charger and then a destrier, and depending on what kind of battle scene you're going into, that would be what you would have in that moment. And then you would have your squires in the back of the battlefield ready with your next mount so you could swap off and keep fighting. Which is why knights were so valued. It is why knights' horses were so valued, because they had to be highly trained for a variety of different skills. We can go into more of that, I suppose. But that's the difference between the palfrey and the destrier. So, I mean, you picture Ella on this, I don't know, I sometimes picture a pony when I think of a palfrey. Just a sweet little old pony. And then you've got a destrier, which is this big, hulking, muscled, probably stallion, because they're kind of gutsy and brave. So there is some research that shows that the destriers were not really as big as fiction, and especially like Hollywood make us believe. Like they were more like our standard what would be a good example? I'm kind of picturing a Mustang. Not so like stocky, strong, sturdy, athletic, but not really like as massive as we kind of say, like picture they were now. And then the argument to that is, well, they had to be strong enough to carry a full-grown man in full armor. And you got to kind of keep in mind, our modern day people are a little bit bigger than medieval people, if you want to be technical. Like, look at the door frames of houses that were built back then versus now. Average height is a little taller than medieval day, and I don't know. You can go down a rabbit hole with that one. But bottom line, that was my first horse scene in this book. And there's a lot more in here. So, hope you enjoyed it. Those are my thoughts. So, if we want to be technical on how realistic it is that she goes riding off side saddle for the strange night, yes, it would have been scandalous, which I make it in the book. Yes, it would have been kind of tricky, which I made it in the book. But she does it because she is Eleanor, and she is like the super horsewoman. And yeah, it kind of opens up a whole can of worms for her, though. So I had to read the book in order to find that one out, though. So, all right, that's it for today. Have a great day, guys. Bye.